When a frightened little girl begged to stay on the school bus overnight, the driver first assumed that it was an innocent request. But a glimpse of a bruise beneath her sleeve, and the fear in her eyes, revealed a far darker truth. With her life hanging in the balance, a desperate race against time began. A teacher, a bus driver, and a relentless social worker must uncover the danger at home before it was too late. This was a story of bravery, resilience, and the relentless fight for justice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Macy was 9 years old, and by the time she set foot on the late afternoon school bus, her eyes were already glossy with worry. The day had been as gray as the morning sky that hovered over Hollingsworth Academy, a private charter school that prided itself on high test scores and an emphasis on holistic care for its students. The campus was spread out in a crescent shape of white brick buildings, with a wide courtyard dotted by weather-beaten benches. Despite the school's well-tended flower beds and bright posters encouraging friendship, Macy seemed impervious to the welcoming environment. She trudged along the aisle of the bus, her shoulders hunched forward under a too-big hoodie. The driver, a kindly older man named Travis, watched her as he always did, worried but hopeful. He had been driving that bus for many years and had seen every manner of tantrum, mischief, and boredom from the children in his care. But Macy was different. She didn't chatter with friends, didn't jostle her backpack for snacks, didn't indulge in playful arguments about who got which seat. She merely slid into the back row, pressed her cheek against the window, and stared. It was a dreary afternoon with a drizzle that made an almost soothing tattoo on the roof of the bus. Each raindrop seemed to mirror the sense of isolation that clung to Macy like a dark cloak. With every bump in the road, she appeared to shrink further into herself. A few seats ahead, older students were preoccupied with their phones and casual banter. No one paid Macy much attention, and she seemed fine with that. When all the other kids had finally left at their respective stops, Travis glanced in the rearview mirror. Macy remained in the very back seat. He considered that perhaps she was lost in a daydream, so he parked at the last stop and turned off the engine. The hiss of the brakes startled her. She stared at him with wide, apprehensive eyes, as if expecting a scolding. Travis offered her a small smile. "It's your stop, honey," Travis said, his tone gentle. "We're here." Macy hesitated. Her gaze darted to the half-open bus door, then back to Travis. She seemed to be calculating something. After a long moment, she whispered, "Can I please stay here? Just for tonight." Her voice shook with a fear that went well beyond mere childhood nerves. Travis blinked in surprise. "Why would you want to do that?" he asked. He tried to keep his tone light, but a ripple of concern formed in his chest. Macy didn't answer right away. She lowered her head, clutching her backpack straps. "I'm scared," she said, her voice so faint he had to strain to hear. Travis paused, uncertain how to handle such a strange request. Maybe it was some kind of prank or the product of an overactive imagination. But then Macy brushed back the sleeve of her hoodie. In the afternoon's waning light, he caught sight of a bruise on her forearm, faintly greenish-yellow around the edges, as though it was in the later stages of healing. She pulled the sleeve back into place quickly, as though frightened of drawing more attention to it. A jolt of worry went through Travis. He had 2 grown daughters of his own, and the paternal instinct in him bristled. Something was wrong here, and he was reluctant to let her go without finding out more. "Macy," he said carefully, "let's go back to the school for a moment. I'll let the office know you need some help." Her expression turned panicky. "Don't tell them," she blurted. "Please. I'll be in trouble." The trembling in her hands was noticeable, and she shrank farther into the seat, hugging her knees. Travis frowned, then exhaled, trying to remain calm. "Come on," he said softly. "We'll figure this out. I promise no one is going to hurt you. But we can't stay on the bus all night." Macy stared at him, and tears threatened to spill from her eyes. She looked so small. "Please," she whispered. Don't make me go home. Those words, so timid yet pleading, squeezed at Travis's heart. Something in her voice confirmed his worst suspicion. Her home was no refuge. He had to do something. He returned to the driver's seat and fired up the engine, feeling a sense of dread in his stomach. He was not a social worker, nor a teacher, but he knew exactly who to call. Word spread quickly that something was off with Macy. By the time Travis brought her back to campus, where Ms. Keller, the principal's assistant, was still in the administration building finishing some late paperwork, the rumble of thunder outside had intensified. Storm clouds turned the sky an inky black. Ms. Keller rushed out, holding her umbrella, nearly slipping on the wet curb as she approached the bus. She found Macy cowering in the rear seat, eyes red from crying. "Macy," Ms. Keller said gently, "it's okay. I'm here. Travis told me you didn't want to go home." Macy nodded, tears brimming. She bit her lower lip as though she was physically holding something in. Ms. Keller extended her hand, but Macy didn't take it right away. Then, carefully, Ms. Keller coaxed her forward. "I promise we'll do everything we can to help." She led Macy into the building, where the lights overhead hummed quietly. The hallways were empty, classrooms locked for the evening. There was a hush, broken only by the steady drumming of rain against the windows. Ms. Keller guided Macy toward the main office, her heart pounding, uncertain how to best protect the child but determined to do something. Even as she did, she noticed a bruise along Macy's wrist when the girl tried to adjust her backpack strap. "Do those hurt?" Ms. Keller asked, voice tentative. Macy shook her head but offered no further explanation. In that moment, Ms. Keller knew who to call next. They needed Ms. Taylor, the social worker assigned to Hollingsworth Academy, someone with experience in these matters. Ms. Keller quickly pulled out her phone and made the call. While waiting for Ms. Taylor to arrive, Ms. Keller sat with Macy in the staff lounge, offering a warm cup of cocoa from the vending machine. Macy took a sip, her hands trembling around the foam cup. "Thank you," Macy said, her voice cracking. She looked exhausted, as though the weight she carried had drained her entire spirit. Ms. Keller put a gentle hand on Macy's shoulder, offering what little comfort she could in that tense, uncertain moment. In a short while, Ms. Taylor arrived, hastily wrapped in a trench coat that dripped from the relentless downpour outside. Her determined eyes locked onto Macy, and something sparked behind them, a protective, knowing glint. She approached, careful not to appear too abrupt or overbearing. "Hello, Macy," Miss Taylor said, soft yet firm. "My name is Grace Taylor. I'm here to help." Macy gave a tiny nod. "Hi," she whispered, fixing her gaze on the floor. Miss Taylor gently lowered herself to eye level with Macy. "I'd like to ask you a few questions if that's okay. You can say no at any time." But Macy only curled her arms around herself, as though even the air around her felt dangerous. Miss Taylor's gaze shifted to Miss Keller, and she gave a single nod. The tension in the air was heavy enough to feel like a living thing, throbbing between them. Over the next half hour, Miss Taylor tried to coax details from Macy, but the girl responded only with short, careful answers. Yes, she lived with her foster parents, Craig and Dana Whitmore. Yes, she sometimes got into trouble, but it was never anything big. No, she wasn't feeling well today. No, she didn't need to see a nurse. Her eyes brimmed with tears, yet she insisted everything was fine. Miss Taylor took notes, her frustration mounting behind a calm exterior. She'd seen this before, children terrified to speak the truth, fearful of retribution if they dared reveal the horrors behind closed doors. The bruises told a story Macy couldn't or wouldn't verbalize. Miss Taylor thanked Miss Keller and Travis for bringing Macy's situation to her attention, promising them she would go to the Whitmore's house to investigate further. Though Miss Taylor projected a confident aura, her heart was heavy. Children in foster care sometimes carried trauma from past experiences, and it was not always straightforward to discern the real threat. That night, Miss Taylor drove through the rain-swept streets to a modest suburban cul-de-sac where the Whitmores lived. The property appeared neat, A single-story home with a tidy lawn and a row of decorative shrubs. Warm lights glowed in the windows, giving the impression of normalcy. She knocked on the front door, steeling herself for a potentially difficult conversation. Dana Whitmore answered, wearing a polite smile, her hair pinned back neatly. "Oh, Miss Taylor, right?" she said, as if recognizing her from previous visits or phone calls. "We appreciate your time, though I'm surprised you came at this hour." Inside, Miss Taylor found Craig in the living room, reading a newspaper. He stood up to greet her, his face forming a courteous expression. "Evening," he said. He reached out to shake her hand with a formality that felt performed, even rigid. Miss Taylor explained that there had been concerns about Macy's well-being, carefully observing the couple's reactions. Dana's mouth formed an O of alarm, while Craig's brows knit together in dismay. "We love Macy," Dana insisted. "She's our daughter, for all intents and purposes. If anything, she's been distant with us lately, not the other way around." Craig nodded, lips tight, as though annoyed that Miss Taylor would even suspect them of wrongdoing. Sometimes kids get bruises, especially if they're not careful. Macy is prone to accidents. Miss Taylor noticed how Dana set a protective hand over her own wrist, as though bracing for an attack, and how Craig's smile was a fraction too wide, too fixed. Their claims about Macy's clumsiness echoed a pattern Miss Taylor had heard many times, deflecting suspicion. But the social worker maintained a practiced calm, taking mental note. She asked to see Macy's bedroom and the places where the girl often spent time. Dana guided Miss Taylor down a short corridor to a small bedroom. The space was neat and functional but lacked warmth. The bed was made, the dresser drawers closed, walls decorated only by a single, generic floral painting. There were no personal touches. No children's drawings, no stuffed animals, not even pictures of the three of them smiling together. "The bedroom looks fine," Miss Taylor said, feigning a polite tone, though a knot tightened in her gut. "Has Macy complained of anything? Pain, discomfort, or perhaps feeling uneasy at home?" Dana lowered her head slightly, as though taking offense. "Of course not. She just has nightmares sometimes. She's had a tough past, you know. We do what we can to help her." Miss Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. Could I speak with her for just a moment before I go?" Craig hesitated, then motioned for Miss Taylor to follow him to another room. Macy was curled on a small couch in a den area, staring at the flickering television. When Miss Taylor entered, Macy sat upright, her eyes apprehensive. Dana lingered in the doorway. "Macy," Miss Taylor said, her voice gentle but carrying a note of authority. "I just want to make sure you're all right." Macy's gaze shifted to Dana for a fleeting moment before she spoke. "Yes, I'm fine," she said, her tone robotic. "Are you sure?" Miss Taylor asked, crouching down to meet Macy's eye level. "I saw a bruise on your wrist. Is that from a fall?" Macy nodded, looking down at her lap. "I fell off my bike," she said, voice barely audible. She repeated the words as if reading from a script. "I should be more careful." Miss Taylor's pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of guarded response she had expected. She gently placed her hand near Macy's, not touching but close enough to convey empathy. "If you're ever scared or hurt, you can tell me, okay? I'm here to help." Macy blinked, and Miss Taylor noticed the faint quiver in her lower lip. "I'm okay," Macy said. That was the end of the conversation. Miss Taylor left with a swirl of conflicting emotions in her chest. The house appeared so orderly, perhaps too orderly, while the child seemed more like a timid stranger than a cherished daughter. Her instincts screamed that something was off, yet without concrete evidence or a statement from Macy, the official channels would be slow and arduous. On her drive back, Miss Taylor gripped the steering wheel and mulled over her strategy. She would need to watch Macy closely. Perhaps speak with teachers like Mr. Daniels, who had known the girl longer. Hollingsworth Academy the next day bustled with activity. The hallways echoed with chatter and the slams of locker doors. Posters announcing School Spirit Week and an upcoming bake sale decorated the walls. Mr. Daniels, the fifth-grade history teacher, was in his classroom early, reviewing some lesson plans. He was in his early 30s, with a kind face and a calm presence that comforted even the most anxious student. There was a certain warmth in his voice whenever he read aloud from textbooks or introduced new historical fact. He noticed Macy the first day she had arrived at Hollingsworth Academy months ago. Something about her posture, a hunched wariness, had drawn his concern. When the bell rang, a steady trickle of students filed in. Macy sat in the front corner, so quiet that Mr. Daniels occasionally forgot she was there during the hustle of class activities. Yet whenever he spoke to her directly, she would meet his gaze with a polite, almost desperate attempt to please. It reminded him of a skittish stray animal that wanted kindness but was too accustomed to pain. Today, Mr. Daniels noticed fresh tension in Macy's expression. Dark circles hung under her eyes, as though she had barely slept. She kept her arms crossed over her desk as he talked about their upcoming unit on state history. She flinched at the slightest noises, the squeaking of a chair, the rustling of papers. "Macy," Mr. Daniels said softly as the class split into small groups. He crouched by her desk to look her in the eyes. "Are you feeling all right today? You look a bit tired." She nodded quickly. "I'm fine," she whispered, fumbling with the edge of her notebook. "Did you get enough sleep last night?" he asked, concerned. Macy shrugged, then nodded again. "Yeah, I'm okay." Mr. Daniels exhaled gently, resisting the urge to press her too hard. He recalled a conversation he'd had with Ms. Keller the previous evening, after she had stayed late at the school. She had informed him that Macy seemed to be in distress but refused to open up. The worry in Ms. Keller's voice echoed in Mr. Daniels's mind. He debated whether to ask Macy more questions now or wait. In the end, he decided to tread carefully for the moment. Pushing a fearful child to talk could cause her to retreat further into silence. Instead, he invited her to help distribute worksheets to the class, hoping that a small act of inclusion might ease her anxiety. Macy complied without complaint, though she kept her head low and said nothing. At lunchtime, Mr. Daniels escorted his class to the cafeteria, ensuring that Macy was never more than a few steps away. She lined up with the other children, balancing her tray of spaghetti and fruit, and found a table in the corner by herself. It didn't escape Mr. Daniels's notice that she didn't sit with classmates who might have welcomed her. Despite some attempts by friendly peers, Macy isolated herself, stirring her food in slow circles. Ms. Taylor arrived during the lunch period, scanning the cafeteria. When she spotted Macy alone, she headed over. Sitting across from Macy, Miss Taylor offered a comforting smile. "Hi, Macy. Mind if I sit?" Macy shook her head, focusing on her untouched spaghetti. Miss Taylor glanced around, noticing a few other students eyeing them curiously. "I spoke with your foster parents last night," Miss Taylor said gently, mindful of her volume. "They said you've been having trouble sleeping. Is that true?" Macy tensed, shrugging. "I'm okay," she repeated. There was a tiny tremor in her voice that said otherwise. Miss Taylor studied the girl's face. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here," she said. "I know sometimes it's scary or confusing, but you can tell me anything. I won't get mad, and it won't be your fault." Macy said nothing, but her eyes shimmered with a hint of tears she tried to hold back. Before Miss Taylor could continue, two other fifth graders came over, giggling about an inside joke. Macy looked alarmed, as though cornered, and Miss Taylor decided to give her some space. She stood up, gently patting Macy's shoulder before retreating. The quick, shallow breaths Macy took did not go unnoticed. Later that day, as the final bell rang and the students scattered to their buses, Mr. Daniels lingered in his classroom, tidying up papers. He caught sight of Macy as she walked down the hallway with her backpack slung over one shoulder. Though she made eye contact with him and nodded politely, there was a rift of worry in her expression. He debated speaking to her but decided to let her go, reasoning that Travis, the bus driver, might keep an eye on her as well. Meanwhile, Miss Taylor made her way to the principal's office to discuss her concerns with the administration. "I'm telling you, something isn't right," she said, her tone measured yet urgent. "Children can't always articulate abuse clearly. They're afraid, or they think no one will believe them." Dr. Hardaway, the school principal, listened attentively. A serious man with neat gray hair, he clasped his hands on the desk. "We need something concrete," he said. "In order to involve Child Protective Services, we need evidence, or at least a statement from Macy that indicates abuse." Ms. Taylor took a breath. "I can't force her to talk. If she feels threatened, she'll clam up. Abused children do that for survival." But Travis saw a bruise. Ms. Keller saw bruises. "Mr. Daniels has noticed her fear. We all have. It has to mean something." Dr. Hardaway nodded. "I understand your position, Miss Taylor. I'll do whatever I can from this end, but we must proceed carefully. The Whitmores have always presented themselves as upstanding. They passed all the foster care evaluations. It's going to take some diligent observation and documentation." Ms. Taylor's lips tightened in concern. "Then I'll start by documenting everything," she said. "I'll interview teachers, talk to Travis more formally, and keep a close eye on Macy." The following week brought a swirl of tension as the staff tried their best to make Macy feel safe enough to open up. For a while, it seemed like the situation might remain shrouded in secrecy. Macy continued to come to school each day, silent and cautious. She wore long sleeves, even on warmer afternoons, and always tried to sit where her arms could be concealed beneath the desk. She answered Mr. Daniels's questions politely, but never divulged personal details. Occasionally, Ms. Keller or Miss Taylor would catch a flicker of what lay behind her guarded eyes, a deep fear like the sight of a trapped bird. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything escalated. Travis found Macy waiting nervously at the back of the bus again, after all the other kids had left. She asked once more if she could stay the night. The look on her face was heartbreak incarnate, pleading, trembling. Travis felt his heart sink. "Macy," he said, "we can't do this. I want to help, but you need to let us find a way to keep you safe. I can't leave you here on the bus." She started to cry quietly, hugging her knees. I can't go home," she said, her voice cracking. "Please." Travis hesitated, remembering Miss Taylor's instructions to call her if Macy showed signs of distress. He gently patted Macy's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart," he said. "We'll go inside and I'll call Miss Taylor. Let's see what we can do." Macy resisted at first, but Travis spoke with such kindness that she relented. He escorted her back to the school's front office, dripping wet from the drizzle outside. Miss Keller looked up from her paperwork and immediately recognized the dread in Macy's gaze. She called Miss Taylor, who arrived shortly, wearing a look of focused concern. This time, Miss Taylor insisted that Macy come to her office for a private conversation. Ms. Keller stayed in the waiting area, hoping that Macy might finally feel safe enough to open up. But even behind the closed door, Macy seemed paralyzed. Miss Taylor gently tried to guide her, offering assurances. "Macy, if someone at home is hurting you, I can protect you. You don't have to suffer." But Macy only shook her head in silence, tears sliding down her cheeks. She pressed her lips together, refusing to speak. The frustration in Miss Taylor's eyes was evident. She knew something was terribly wrong but had no direct confession or explicit evidence to act upon. Finally, after many minutes of agonizing silence, Miss Taylor sighed, her tone gentling even further. "I'll contact Child Protective Services," she said. "They might want to do a home visit. But if you're not safe, I need to know. Please." Macy stared at her hands, trembling. Her silence was all Miss Taylor got in response. That evening, Miss Taylor filed a formal report, explaining the repeated incidents of bruises, Macy's extreme fear, and her desperate attempts to avoid going home. It was enough to trigger an investigation. The next few days turned into a whirlwind of administrative protocols. CPS officials arrived at the Whitmores' home with Miss Taylor. Craig greeted them at the door with a cool politeness that barely masked his annoyance. Dana hovered nearby, twisting her hands nervously. The officials looked around, took notes, and spoke formally with Macy. She sat stiffly on the couch, eyes darting between her foster parents and the social workers, offering the same denials as before. "No, nobody hurts me. I fall a lot," Macy said, her voice dull and mechanical. The monotone acceptance of blame was haunting. Yet the CPS officials made note of fresh bruises on her wrists, shaped almost like finger imprints. Dana insisted Macy had been climbing a tree. The explanation sounded contrived, and there was a fleeting moment when Miss Taylor locked eyes with one of the CPS officers, silently conveying her belief that something darker was at play. Without sufficient immediate proof of direct physical abuse, CPS hesitated to remove Macy from the home on the spot. The Whitmores put on a courteous facade, offering coffee and insisting they were more than happy to cooperate. Macy's own silence was the biggest obstacle. The system, bound by regulations and the necessity of evidence, left Macy in a precarious limbo. That very night, Miss Taylor found herself awake at her kitchen table, sifting through documents, phone numbers, and case histories. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that each day they allowed Macy to remain in that house was dangerous. But Macy's fear was so deeply ingrained that it was crippling her ability to speak out. Miss Taylor needed a plan, perhaps to gather testimonies from those who had glimpsed signs of abuse, or to catch the Whitmores in a moment of inconsistency. At Hollingsworth Academy, Mr. Daniels and Ms. Keller formed a quiet alliance. They both kept watch over Macy, sometimes inviting her to eat in the staff lounge or offering her small tasks to keep her close after class. It was during one such time, while Macy was helping Mr. Daniels organize some old history project posters, that he saw an ugly bruise peeking out from under her collar. She was adjusting a stack of papers, and her neckline slipped, revealing a purplish mark near her shoulder. Alarm shot through Mr. Daniels. He kept his voice soft to avoid scaring her. "Macy, did you bump into something on your way to school?" It was a gentle opener, though he suspected that was not the truth. Macy's hand went instantly to her collar, hiding the bruise again. Her cheeks flushed. "I'm just clumsy," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "Please don't ask about it." Mr. Daniels felt his stomach twist. "Macy," he said, softly but urgently, "I care about you. If something's happening at home, it's not your fault, and you don't have to be afraid." She shook her head, tears spilling. "I'm fine," she muttered, her voice raw. He wanted to push further, but a shadow of abject terror passed through her eyes, and he backed off. He nodded sympathetically, placing a gentle hand on the desk. "Okay," he said. "I'm here if you change your mind." A few minutes later, Macy gathered her things and left. Mr. Daniels felt helpless, anger coursing through him at the unseen torment this child endured. The memory of the bruise lingered like a dark stain in his mind. He realized Miss Taylor was doing everything she could, but it might not be enough. That evening, he typed up a written statement of what he had seen and handed it to Miss Taylor, who included it in her report for CPS. As the days stretched into weeks, the tension escalated on all fronts. The Whitmores sensed they were under suspicion. Craig began to appear at school more often, meeting Macy at the front gate in the mornings, where he'd pretend to straighten her jacket or backpack, but actually looked around as if daring any staff member to confront him. Dana accompanied Macy to and from the bus stop, always wearing a perfunctory smile that vanished the second no one was watching. It wasn't long before a second home visit by CPS was arranged, spurred by the accumulation of testimonies. This time, the officials arrived unannounced, hoping to catch the Whitmores off guard. They found the house locked and quiet. After persistent knocking, Dana answered the door, looking rattled. Macy was found in her bedroom, kneeling over some homework. Again, she was asked about her bruises. 2 more had appeared on her forearm. Again, she denied any wrongdoing by her foster parent. However, the repeated discoveries of bruises and the intense fear saturating Macy's behavior finally swayed the CPS officers. They made the difficult decision to remove her from the Whitmore's care until a proper investigation could be concluded. Dana protested tearfully, insisting they were being unfairly targeted. Craig grew silent, his stare cold and hostile toward the officers. Macy began to cry, clinging to a stuffed cat she'd been given in her previous foster home. "I don't want to go," she managed to say through choked sobs, though no one could be certain whether she meant leaving the Whitmores or the fear of being placed in another unknown environment. The haunted look in her eyes was enough to make Miss Taylor swallow back tears of her own. That evening, Macy was taken to a youth shelter, a temporary holding place for children in protective custody. The sterile walls and harsh fluorescent lighting made it feel institutional. Rows of bunk beds lined a large sleeping area shared by other children, some older, some younger, each with their own stories of abandonment or abuse. Macy huddled in a corner bed, hugging her knees, trembling at every sound in the hallway. Staff members at the shelter tried to be kind, but they were overworked and understaffed. Macy felt adrift, uprooted once again, forced to live among strangers. Memories of her past swirl in her mind. She had been in foster care since she was 5, drifting from one home to another. The Whitmores were simply the latest in a string of guardians who promised to care for her but brought her only pain. Yet, even now, as she lay staring at the ceiling, she felt the pang of guilt. She had told the social workers nothing, and still, everything had fallen apart. Early the next morning, staff discovered that Macy's bed was empty and her few belongings were gone. She had run away. A desperate search ensued. The shelter staff called Miss Taylor, who in turn alerted local authorities. Posters and digital bulletins were drafted, describing a small 9-year-old girl with light brown hair and timid eyes. Meanwhile, Miss Taylor called Mr. Daniels, her voice frantic. "Macy ran away," she said. "I don't know where she could go. She doesn't have any family or close friends. We're worried she might be wandering the streets." Mr. Daniels felt his stomach drop. "I'll help. I can drive around the area near the school or around the Whitmore's neighborhood." Hours passed with no sign of Macy. A persistent drizzle left the roads slick, and dawn had barely broken by the time Mr. Daniels headed out in his car. He checked the playgrounds, the library, the small grocery store parking lots where a frightened child might hide. Street by street, he searched, fighting the knot of fear that tightened in his chest with every turn. Finally, near an underpass by a row of closed shops, he spotted a small figure huddled against the cold, arms wrapped around her knees. He pulled over, heart pounding. Macy looked soaked and shivering, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. The exhaustion in her eyes told him she had been out all night. Gently, Mr. Daniels approached, kneeling so he wouldn't tower over her. "Macy," he said softly, removing his coat and draping it over her shoulders. "It's me, Mr. Daniels. I've been looking everywhere for you." She lifted her eyes, which were dull with resignation. "I don't want to go to another place," she rasped, voice hoarse and weak. "I can't keep doing this." Mr. Daniels's throat tightened. "I know," he said, a tremor in his own voice. "But you can't stay out here. It's too dangerous. Please, come with me." She said nothing, only stared at him with a forlorn expression. He offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her small, shaking hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. He led her to the passenger seat of his car, carefully buckling her seatbelt, his hands trembling slightly. He could barely contain his relief that he had found her alive and unharmed by the elements. Driving back, he stole glances at her. "Macy, you know I'm here to help you, right?" he said. "I can't stand by and let you suffer alone." She gazed at the raindrops trickling down the window. "No one can fix it," she said, her voice low. "They always say they'll help, but they don't." Mr. Daniels's heart broke. "You're not alone anymore," he promised. "We'll figure something out." By the time they arrived at the youth shelter, Miss Taylor was already there, pacing anxiously. When she saw Macy, relief spread across her face, followed by exasperation and concern. The staff quickly wrapped Macy in a blanket and offered hot tea. Mr. Daniels and Miss Taylor stepped aside to discuss the next step. "I can't let her run away again," Miss Taylor said, voice trembling with emotion. "She's not safe on the streets." "I'll foster her," Mr. Daniels said suddenly, surprising even himself with the urgency in his voice. "If the system allows it, I want to take her in. I've been thinking about it ever since I found out what was happening. I have space at my home. I can give her a stable environment." Miss Taylor studied him, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Are you sure? That's a big responsibility. And the Whitmores?" "I don't care about them," Mr. Daniels said, determination lighting his eyes. "I know it's not simple. But I can't stand by and watch Macy get lost in the system again. It might even help her trust us if she knows she has a safe place with someone who genuinely cares." Miss Taylor exhaled shakily, nodding. "I'll talk to CPS. We'll do an emergency placement if we can. But you'll have to go through the foster training and checks quickly. I'll do everything I can to expedite it." Within days, Mr. Daniels was approved for emergency fostering thanks to his clean record, stable job, and the support of the school's administration. Macy moved into his modest two-bedroom home, a cozy place with well-worn furniture and a faint scent of pine from the cleaning products he used too infrequently. The second bedroom had been a guest room, but he quickly transformed it into a space for Macy, painting the walls a soft lilac color and adding a small bookshelf filled with age-appropriate novels. On the first evening, Macy wandered around the house, eyes wide and uncertain. "You can explore," Mr. Daniels said gently, giving her a reassuring smile. "This is your home now." She nodded, gingerly pushing open the door to her new room. A teddy bear sat on the bed, placed there by Mr. Daniels earlier. She ran her fingers over its plush fur, a flicker of childlike curiosity momentarily eclipsing her apprehension. She sat on the edge of the bed, her posture stiff. Mr. Daniels hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to give her space or stay to offer comfort. "I'll be in the living room if you need me," he said, sensing her nerves. She glanced at him and offered a small nod. Taking that as her cue, he left her alone, praying silently that she would feel safe under his roof. That night, Macy barely slept, according to the glow of light from under her door. Mr. Daniels woke at dawn, finding her sitting at the kitchen table, hugging that teddy bear and staring at the muted television. He prepared a simple breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast. She nibbled on the food, still half lost in her own thoughts. He noticed faint bruise marks on her neck and her wrists, which made his anger flare anew toward the people who had hurt her. But he kept his expression calm, determined not to rattle her. Over the next couple of weeks, an odd semblance of a routine formed. Mr. Daniels woke early to grade papers or prepare lessons, then dropped Macy at school. After classes, they drove home together, and he tried to make dinner she might enjoy: spaghetti, mac and cheese, chicken soup. The transition wasn't smooth. More than once, he found her trembling in the hallway at night, haunted by nightmares. But each time he did, he gently guided her back to bed, speaking softly, sometimes singing a lullaby he vaguely remembered from his own childhood. Despite his best efforts to provide stability, the threat of the Whitmores loomed. A legal battle brewed behind the scenes. Miss Taylor gathered the statements from staff and documented the bruises, while the Whitmores adamantly denied any wrongdoing. The court case was set to determine whether the Whitmores' foster license should be revoked permanently and whether charges would be filed for child abuse. The tension weighed heavily on everyone involved, especially Macy. Mr. Daniels and Miss Taylor prepared Macy for the possibility that she might need to speak in court. The child was terrified at the thought. "I can't," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "They'll get me if I say anything." Miss Taylor crouched before Macy in Mr. Daniels's living room, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "Macy, the truth is your best protection. We'll be with you every step of the way. If you tell the judge what happened, they can't send you back to the Whitmores." Macy's lip quivered. "But Craig and Dana said if I ever told, nobody would believe me anyway," she said, voice shaking. "They said kids always lie, and the system would just blame me." Mr. Daniels rubbed his temples, anger surging at the manipulative cruelty of those words. "They're wrong," he said, gently but firmly. "We believe you, and the judge will too. But only if you feel ready to talk." Macy made no promise. Over the following days, her anxiety peaked. She had panic attacks so severe that sometimes she'd start hyperventilating in Mr. Daniels's bathroom. He would stay with her, calming her breath, reminding her she was safe now. Slowly, she regained composure, though her eyes were shadowed by the fear that lingered. The day of the hearing arrived with a chill wind that rattled the courthouse windows. The building was a tall, imposing structure of gray stone, set behind meticulously pruned hedges. Macy clung to Mr. Daniels's side, dressed in her best clothes, simple black pants and a neat sweater, her hair brushed and pinned back. Miss Taylor led them to a waiting room, trying to exude confidence she partly lacked. Inside the hearing chamber, a judge presided at a large wooden desk. The Whitmores sat at a table with their lawyer, both wearing grim, sober expressions. Craig glanced over his shoulder once, locking eyes with Macy, who flinched. The bailiff instructed everyone to remain seated. Then testimonies began. Miss Taylor presented her case, detailing her findings, the visible bruises, and the repeated attempts by Macy to evade going home. Mr. Daniels added his account of how he'd found Macy trembling at school, the bruises he'd seen, and how desperate she had been when she ran away from the shelter. The Whitmores' lawyer countered with claims that Macy was a troubled child with a history of lying. Craig spoke in measured, clipped sentences about how they had tried to help Macy. Dana wept softly, insisting they had only shown love and discipline for her own good. It was a classic defense, painting Macy as confused or manipulative. When Macy's turn came to speak, she froze. She glanced at Miss Taylor and Mr. Daniels, then at Craig and Dana. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Terror etched itself across her face. She began to tremble so violently that the judge asked if she needed a moment to collect herself. The child nodded helplessly, tears sliding down her cheeks. They stepped out of the courtroom briefly. Miss Taylor knelt beside her, hugging her gently. "You can do this," Miss Taylor whispered. "No matter what they say, we believe you. I'm right here." Mr. Daniels reached for Macy's hand, holding it firmly. "I promise you're safe," he said, voice low. "Do you trust me?" Macy nodded, tears clinging to her lashes. "Yes," she whispered. They returned to the courtroom, and this time, when the judge asked if she would speak, Macy inhaled a shaky breath. She looked directly at Craig and Dana, her small hands fisted at her sides. "They hurt me," she said, her voice quivering. They grabbed me too hard, and they yelled a lot, and sometimes I thought I wouldn't be able to breathe." A hush fell over the room. Macy kept going, voice threaded with fear and shame. "I didn't know who to tell, because I was scared. But Mr. Daniels and Miss Taylor, they helped me. They found me." The cracks in Dana's facade showed in that moment, a flicker of panic crossing her features. Craig's eyes widened, though he attempted to maintain a calm posture. Their lawyer tried to object, claiming the child was being coached, but the judge silenced him with a stern wave. Macy's trembling confession seemed to pierce through the strategic veneer the Whitmores had constructed. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered that Macy remain in Mr. Daniels's care while criminal charges were pursued against the Whitmores for child abuse. The official verdict and sentencing would come later, but for now, it was clear that the system believed Macy's story. As the hearing concluded, Miss Taylor gave Macy a tearful hug. Mr. Daniels squeezed her shoulder, relief washing over him. But as they left the courthouse, an uneasy feeling trailed them. Craig and Dana, though legally constrained, stared after them with a look of cold, vengeful anger. Macy clutched Mr. Daniels's hand, her breath coming out in short gasps. "They're mad," she whispered. "They hate me now." "Let them be angry," Miss Taylor said firmly, though she too eyed the Whitmores with caution. "They can't touch you anymore." In the days that followed, Macy resumed going to school, returning each evening to Mr. Daniels's home. A weight seemed lifted from her shoulders, yet a certain dread lingered in her eyes. Mr. Daniels and Miss Taylor reassured her repeatedly that she was safe, and for the first time in her young life, Macy began to believe it, until everything shifted again, just when they thought they had won. About 2.5 weeks after the hearing, late one night, Mr. Daniels woke to the sound of a glass window shattering. He jolted up in his bed, heart pounding, half convinced it was a dream. The house was dark except for the street lamp glow filtering through the living room curtains. Then he heard a muffled scream. Scrambling out of bed in panic, he rushed toward Macy's room. Halfway down the hallway, he collided with a figure in the dark. A forceful shove sent him sprawling backward. In the faint glow, he saw Craig Whitmore standing there, fists clenched, face contorted with rage. "Where is she?" Craig hissed. "You think you can steal her from us?" Mr. Daniels's heart hammered. "Get out of my house," he demanded, voice quavering. He tried to stand, but Craig shoved him again, this time with enough force to knock him into the wall. Then Dana appeared, stepping around her husband, heading straight for Macy's room. A rush of protective fury coursed through Mr. Daniels. He lunged at Craig, grappling with him, desperate to keep him from reaching Macy. But Craig was bigger, stronger, fueled by a rage that made his actions frenzied. With a violent jolt, Craig elbowed Mr. Daniels in the stomach. Pain flared, forcing him to his knees. In the next moment, Dana dragged Macy into the hallway, her hand clenched around the girl's arm. Macy's eyes were wide with terror, tears streaking her face. She tried to scream, but Dana clamped a hand over her mouth. "Shut up," Dana spat, her own face twisted with a venomous anger that had replaced the usual veneer of politeness. Mr. Daniels struggled to rise, but Craig pinned him, pressing an arm against his throat. "You keep your hands off her," Mr. Daniels choked out, voice strangled. But the choking pressure made him see spots before his eyes. Craig snarled, "She's ours. We're not letting some do-gooder teacher take her away." Dana dragged Macy toward the back door, which they must have forced open or broken in. Macy kicked and struggled, but Dana's grip was relentless. "Help!" Macy tried to cry, but the word came out muffled. Mr. Daniels summoned what little breath he could, elbowing Craig in the ribs. The move caused Craig to grunt and loosen his hold momentarily. Mr. Daniels gasped for air, adrenaline surging as he scrambled to his feet. But Craig grabbed a decorative vase from a nearby side table and hurled it at him. The vase shattered, shards scattering across the floor, making Mr. Daniels slip. The commotion echoed through the small house. In the chaos, Dana managed to wrestle Macy outside, hauling her toward a dark SUV parked in the alley behind the house. Craig darted after them, leaving Mr. Daniels coughing on the floor, battered and furious. Trembling, Mr. Daniels forced himself to stand. He dashed to the front door, stumbling as he ran, ignoring the throbbing pain in his body. Flinging the door open, he saw the SUV's taillights disappearing into the dark street. A wave of horror crashed over him. Macy was gone. Frantic, he called 911, voice shaking. "They took her," he gasped, wincing as he clutched at his bruised ribs. "Her foster parents, they broke in. They kidnapped Macy." Within minutes, patrol cars surrounded the neighborhood, blue and red lights reflecting off the wet pavement. An officer pulled Mr. Daniels aside, while another group examined the broken window and scattered glass. "Did you get a look at the vehicle? A license plate?" an officer asked. Mr. Daniels shook his head. "It was dark. I just saw an SUV. I think it was black. I'm not sure." They took a statement, frowning gravely at the details. Kidnapping by a set of indicted foster parents. This was a serious case. The search began immediately, local law enforcement dispatching bulletins to neighboring areas, alerting border authorities. Ms. Taylor rushed over as soon as she heard. She found Mr. Daniels standing amid the debris of his ransacked living room, staring at the shattered glass with hollow eyes. "Oh my God," Miss Taylor whispered, tears threatening. "How did this happen?" Mr. Daniels's voice trembled. I couldn't stop them," he managed. "They were so fast, so angry. They threatened me," said Macy was theirs. Miss Taylor put a hand over her mouth, horrified. "They must have planned it. They knew they were facing criminal charges, so they took desperate measures." The next few days were harrowing, a blur of frantic phone calls, strategic searches, and anxious waiting. The FBI became involved because it was clear the Whitmores had crossed state lines. Each day, Miss Taylor and Mr. Daniels wondered if Macy was safe, if she had enough food, if she was enduring more abuse. For Macy, those days were a nightmare. Craig and Dana drove her to a rundown motel in another state, forcing her to stay hidden inside the dingy room. They barked at her if she made a sound, ordering her to stay away from the windows. The tension between Craig and Dana escalated with each hour. They snarled at one another, panicked about how to evade the authorities. Macy's world shrank to that cramped, stained motel space, where the flickering light bulb above the mirror cast eerie shadows. She tried to speak as little as possible, terrified that any word or cry for help would earn her more bruises. Late on the fourth day, the FBI traced a call Craig had placed to a distant relative. Agents tracked the signal to the motel. A coordinated raid was set up in the early hours of the morning. Law enforcement vehicles surrounded the building. Agents in plain jackets and dark pants moved with silent efficiency, quickly clearing the neighboring rooms. As they prepared to breach the door to the Whitmore's room, they announced themselves. Dana shrieked in terror, and Craig grabbed Macy, who was cowering on the bed. "Stay back," he yelled, voice raw with desperation. "She's coming with us." An FBI agent forced the door open, stepping into the room with determined purpose. Macy's eyes locked onto the agent, silent pleas shining from her tear-streaked face. Craig held her in front of him like a shield, not letting her move. Dana trembled in the corner, her breath ragged. "Let the girl go," the agent said, voice firm. "Nobody wants you to get hurt." Craig scowled, gripping Macy's arm. She cried out, the pain making her twist in his grasp. Finally, in a surge of desperate courage, Macy elbowed Craig, catching him off guard. He cursed, momentarily letting go. The agent seized the opportunity, lunging forward and taking Craig down with a swift, practiced maneuver, pinning him. Another agent secured Dana, who offered no resistance beyond frantic sobbing. Macy collapsed onto the bed, shaking, tears streaming down her face. A female FBI agent immediately rushed to her side, gently helping her stand. Macy trembled from head to toe, yet relief flickered across her eyes the moment she realized she was no longer in Craig's clutches. Within minutes, the Whitmores were detained. As they were led out in handcuffs, Dana shot Macy a venomous glare. "You've ruined us," she spat, voice choked by tears. Macy averted her gaze, hugging herself. It was over. Finally, truly over. The phone call that reached Mr. Daniels and Miss Taylor at dawn was the news they'd been praying for. Macy was safe. The relief was so powerful that both of them wept openly. Mr. Daniels barely waited for the official clearance before he drove to the location where the authorities had taken Macy. The sun was just cresting the horizon when he arrived at a local police station in a neighboring state. He spotted Macy inside, wrapped in a blanket, a paramedic checking her vitals. She was pale, eyes puffy from days of tears and no sleep. But when she saw him, she let out a small, broken sob. "Mr. Daniels," she whispered, her voice raw. He scooped her into a gentle hug, his own tears spilling down his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry, Macy. I promise no one will ever take you from me again." She pressed her face into his shoulder, sobbing quietly. For the first time in her young life, she allowed herself to truly believe someone could keep that promise. They returned to Mr. Daniels's home later that day, escorted by Miss Taylor. The house still bore signs of the forced entry, the replaced window, the ragged edges of the old broken frame. Mr. Daniels insisted that Macy rest. He set up a comfortable spot for her on the couch, surrounding her with cushions and a soft blanket. She looked around with tired eyes, as though half expecting the Whitmores to appear again. When the day turned into evening, Miss Taylor visited to check on her, bringing a care package of comfort items, a fuzzy blanket, some crayons, and a notebook for journaling. "How are you feeling?" Miss Taylor asked, kneeling beside the couch. Macy shrugged, tears still close to the surface. "We've got therapists lined up for you," Miss Taylor said, "counselors who specialize in trauma. But it will take time." Macy stared at her hands. "Will they come back?" she asked, voice shaky. "The Whitmores." Miss Taylor looked at Mr. Daniels, who nodded at her to tell the truth. "They're in jail," Miss Taylor said, "and they're going to be prosecuted. They can't get to you anymore. The system made mistakes, but not this time. We won't let you down again." Macy closed her eyes in silent relief, though the fear that lingered in her expression spoke volumes about the scars left behind. Over the next few weeks, Macy began therapy sessions. The quiet nightmares continued, but gradually she started to open up, about the emotional torment, the controlling behavior, the times the Whitmores had grabbed and pushed her. Each confession was a step toward healing. Mr. Daniels offered what stability he could, reminding her to do her homework, cooking dinner, letting her watch cartoons that made her laugh for the first time since he'd known her. School staff and classmates were gentle but supportive when she returned to Hollingsworth Academy. She still startled at sudden noises, but the teachers and even the principal showed an extra layer of kindness. Travis, the bus driver, always greeted her with a warm smile, but she didn't ride the bus as often anymore, preferring the safety of Mr. Daniels's car. By the time the Whitmores' trial concluded, they were both handed down sentences that ensured they wouldn't see freedom anytime soon. Macy didn't have to face them again in court. Her earlier statements and the avalanche of evidence sufficed. She waited anxiously for the verdict, and when Miss Taylor came to Mr. Daniels's house with the news that the Whitmores were being sent to prison, Macy let out a shaky sigh of relief. The months that followed were marked by slow but steady progress. Macy's nightmares lessened in frequency. She began to trust that Mr. Daniels wouldn't raise a hand against her in anger. She spoke a little more in class, even made a tentative friendship with a girl named Ava. She found a sense of peace in small routines, feeding Mr. Daniels's old cat, Buster, every morning or helping with the groceries. Therapy sessions taught her coping mechanisms for her flashbacks, encouraging her to believe she had a future free from the horrors of her past. Not long after the Whitmores' sentencing, Mr. Daniels decided to take a leap that had been forming in his heart for a while. One late afternoon, he sat with Macy on the back porch, where the air was crisp, the sky tinted with a gentle pink hue. She sipped lemonade, her feet dangling off the edge of the step. The swirl of autumn leaves across the yard added a sense of calm. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "I know you've been through a lot," he said gently, "but I wanted to ask how you'd feel if I adopted you." Formally. Macy stared at him, eyes wide. She set the lemonade down carefully. "Adopt me?" she echoed, almost disbelieving. Mr. Daniels smiled softly, though his heart pounded. "I love you, Macy," he said. "I want you to have a home. A permanent home with me, if that's something you'd want." Tears filled her eyes as she absorbed his words. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. I would like that." He wrapped her in a hug, neither of them speaking for several long moments. Miss Taylor, who had been standing in the doorway, quietly observing, wiped her own tears. She had rarely witnessed so pure an expression of hope. This child, who only months before had been locked in terror, now had a future that included love and safety. The adoption process was not immediate. It required background checks, legal forms, and visits with family court judges. But each step felt right. With Ms. Taylor's guidance, Mr. Daniels navigated the bureaucracy with unwavering resolve. The day came when a judge finalized the adoption, and Macy officially became part of Mr. Daniels's family. They didn't hold a big ceremony, just a quiet, joyful moment in a small conference room, with Ms. Taylor snapping a photo of the two of them smiling, relief and happiness shining from both their faces. When they returned home, Ms. Keller had left a tin of freshly baked cookies on their doorstep. Inside, on the counter, a bouquet of wildflowers from the staff at Hollingsworth Academy waited in a vase. The note read, "For Macy, welcome home." Macy traced the edge of the note with a fingertip, tears in her eyes. Mr. Daniels smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, that resilience, that newly found strength glowing behind her gaze. She inhaled a steady breath, letting the moment sink in. No more waiting in bus corners, no more stolen nights cowering under the threat of violence. At last, she had a place where she belonged. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to Mr. Daniels. He hugged her gently, relieved beyond words that they'd reached this day. "We did it, kiddo," he murmured. "You're safe now." Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.